I never thought a slammed door could make my heart skip. But hers did. Margot, my boss, standing there with that impossible mix of exasperation and something I couldn't name, pointing right at me. "One more mistake," she said, voice low, almost a growl, "and you're mine tonight." The words echoed in the cluttered little repair shop like they were meant for me and me alone. I froze, wrench in hand, oil smudged and stupidly aware of the way her heels clicked across the concrete floor. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But there she was, leaning against the counter, the corners of her mouth threatening a smirk, hair falling just so over her shoulder, eyes sharp but not unkind. And I couldn't tear mine away. The smell of engine oil and motor grease mixed with the faint hint of her perfume, something warm, sandalwood maybe, something I wanted to memorize. She moved like she owned the space. Even though this wasn't her shop, it was hers in the way someone owns attention, even when they barely notice it. Every motion, from the tilt of her head to the way she brushed imaginary dust off her sleeve, held some silent confidence I was too young to fully understand. I'll fix it," I stammered, waving a wrench like it was a peace offering. She raised an eyebrow, a single arch that made me aware of my neck, my hands, my ridiculous heartbeat. "I know you will," she said, and her tone softened just enough to make my stomach twist. Then, without another word, she spun back to her papers, deliberately ignoring me, leaving a quiet I couldn't fill. I watched her, pretending to tighten a bolt I didn't need to, catching myself hoping she'd glance up again, just once. And she did. She looked, just for a second, and there was something there, something unspoken, but enough to make me question everything about myself. Did she notice how I bit my lip? Or that I was holding the wrench too tightly? Or that I couldn't move until she had moved first? She handed me a rag, not saying anything, just holding it out. I took it like it was a lifeline, fumbling with it, suddenly aware of how absurd I must have looked. She didn't laugh. She just tilted her head, watched me struggle for a moment longer, then turned back to her desk. That tiny pause, the brief acknowledgement, was electricity in my veins. I wasn't supposed to feel this way. She was my boss, nearly twice my age, poised and untouchable. And yet, every glance, every tiny act of attention from her made the shop feel smaller, closer, like maybe the air between us could carry words that didn't exist yet. I didn't even know what this was exactly, but I wanted it. As I worked, I kept stealing looks, catching her brushing a lock of hair behind her ear, noticing the faint creases at the corner of her eyes when she smiled at the phone, something private and real. And then, as I bent down to pick up a dropped bolt, our eyes met again. Not long, not enough, but enough to make me think I might never stop thinking about it. And just like that, my hands trembling slightly, not from the work, but from her, I realized I was caught. Caught on a single slammed door, a whispered threat, and the smallest act of kindness I didn't know how to return. I'd spent the last 5 minutes wondering why she even cared, and the answer didn't matter. I couldn't stop thinking about the way she looked at me in that silence. If you want, I can also mark subtle micro-behaviors and slow-burning tension in this scene for the YouTube adaptation, so it can guide visuals and pacing. It was late, the fluorescent lights humming over the repair bays, and she was still there, scribbling numbers on that worn clipboard like the world outside didn't exist. I was supposed to be leaving 10 minutes ago, but some impulse had me wiping down the counters instead, pretending the rag in my hands was part of the work. "Could you hold this for a second?" she said, not looking up. The clipboard was heavy, or maybe I just wanted it to be, wanted the excuse to be closer. Her hands were steady, but I noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she adjusted a stack of invoices. A small thing, almost invisible, but it made me pause. I handed it over carefully, watching her shoulders tense, the faint exhale she tried to hide. She didn't meet my eyes, kept her gaze fixed somewhere beyond me, in some private corner of her mind. And yet, the corner of her mouth betrayed her, twitching as if she wanted to smile, but couldn't quite decide whether it was safe. "You've been here a while," I said quietly. My voice felt too loud in the empty shop. She didn't answer immediately, just continued balancing the papers like she could anchor herself to something solid. When she finally spoke, her tone was clipped, careful. I like things done properly. Not a rebuke exactly, but a wall. I leaned against the counter, watching her work, letting the silence stretch between us. There was something fragile beneath that steel, something that made her human in a way I hadn't noticed before. The way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, how her laugh, soft and sudden, escaped in that rare, unguarded moment when she dropped a pen. I can help with that, I offered, trying not to make it sound like I was reading too much into it. She glanced at me briefly, a flicker of hesitation in her gaze, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly. The brief acknowledgement felt heavier than anything she had said before. Her hands moved over the paperwork with practiced precision, but I couldn't stop noticing them. Slender, strong, precise. And when she paused, pinching the bridge of her nose, I caught the faint exhaustion etched into her face. She was always in control, always composed, except for these tiny, fleeting cracks that no one else would see. The tension between us had changed. Before, it had been sharp and immediate, a spark in the air. Now it was a gentle pull, slow and deliberate, a current that neither of us could, or wanted to, resist. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray strand of hair from her face, but I held myself back. She didn't need saving. She needed recognition, maybe, but not interference. When she finally stood, stretching, her eyes met mine for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Something unspoken passed between us. Acknowledgement, curiosity, maybe a warning. I wanted to speak, to fill the space with words that felt too dangerous to say. Instead, I just handed her the clipboard, and our fingers brushed for the briefest instant. She didn't flinch. I didn't move. And for a moment, time slowed. The hum of the lights, the scent of oil and paper, the quiet rhythm of the shop, they all dissolved around that small, charged connection. I watched her walk away, every movement deliberate, every step pulling at something inside me that I didn't yet understand. And I stayed, silent, caught in the orbit of her energy, unable to stop thinking about the way she had hesitated and the faint tremor in her hands that had betrayed a vulnerability no one else would see. Rain hammered against the windows, each drop a drumbeat that made the small repair shop feel like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. I was under the counter, trying to fix a stubborn engine part, but my attention kept drifting to her. Margot sat on a high stool, legs crossed, fingers idly tracing the edge of a coffee mug. She wasn't looking at me, but I could feel her presence like heat radiating across the shop. "I don't usually stay this late," I said, my voice too loud in the quiet. She shrugged, eyes still fixed somewhere past me. "Sometimes things need attention," she murmured. The corners of her mouth twitched, almost a smile, but she looked away before it could grow. I crawled out from under the counter, wiping my hands on a rag I didn't need. The smell of rain mixed with oil, and for a moment, I thought I might drown in the scent of her perfume mingling with the wet air. We were close, closer than either of us had been before, but the space between us still felt like an invisible line neither dared cross. I can help with those bolts," I offered, though it wasn't necessary. She gave me a quick glance, something that wasn't exactly acknowledgement, but wasn't dismissal either. Her hands brushed mine as I handed her a small wrench. A spark, tiny and terrifying, raced up my arm. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words lodged in my throat. The phone rang, sharp and intrusive. She jumped slightly, then reached for it with practiced efficiency. "Hello?" "Oh." Her voice softened, and I heard a man's voice from the other end. I froze, pretending to tighten a bolt while my chest thudded. Some old complication, intruding into this fragile bubble. She ran a hand through her hair, the faint tremor in her fingers betraying the calm she tried to show. I wanted to step closer, to offer some wordless reassurance, but I stayed put. There was rules, there were positions, there was everything that said I shouldn't, but the pull was too strong. She laughed softly, a breath of sound that could have been a secret meant only for me. The kind of laugh that made my throat tight and my hands itch to reach out, to bridge the impossible distance. The storm outside intensified, tapping against the glass like it knew we were teetering on the edge of something. I caught her eyes for a moment longer than safe, and I swear I saw hesitation, an almost confession lurking in that gaze. I wanted to ask her if it was just me, if she felt the same reckless tension threading between us, but I didn't. I couldn't. Instead, I leaned slightly closer under the guise of passing her a tool. Our arms brushed, the contact electric and fleeting. She didn't flinch, but she didn't move closer either. Her lips parted, as if to say something. Then she shook her head and returned her attention to the phone. I stayed frozen for a heartbeat, feeling the weight of what might have happened, or what we both might have wanted to happen, settling into my chest. A near action, a moment that could have broken everything or started something. But it didn't. Not yet. And still, I couldn't stop thinking about the warmth of her hand, the hesitancy in her eyes, and the storm outside, which suddenly seemed like a perfect mirror of the chaos inside me. The shop smelled of rain and oil again, the storm from the night before lingering in puddles along the concrete floor. Margot sat on the edge of the counter, arms folded, eyes fixed somewhere beyond the room, and I stood across from her, feeling like I was both too close and impossibly far away. "I don't understand," I said finally, my voice quieter than I intended. The words seemed to hover between us, impossible to catch. She didn't look at me at first. She never looked at me when the words mattered most. "Understand what?" she asked, calm, measured, but the subtle tension in her shoulders betrayed her. "This us. I don't know what this is anymore," I admitted. My hands fiddled with the rag I'd been using to clean a toolbox, wringing it until it nearly tore. I wanted to reach for her, to explain, to apologize. None of it made sense anymore. She tilted her head, finally meeting my eyes, but it wasn't the spark of mischief or command I'd grown used to. It was hesitation. Fear, maybe, or just exhaustion. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked softly. Not teasing, not challenging, just raw, fragile. "Every day," I said. My voice cracked slightly, and I hated myself for it. She didn't respond immediately. She looked at her hands resting on her knees, tracing invisible patterns on her jeans. The silence stretched, long and suffocating, until it felt like we were two separate storms in the same room. "I don't even know what we're supposed to be," she whispered. Her eyes finally lifted to mine, and the usual sharp confidence was gone. All that remained was Margot, the woman behind the mask I'd been chasing without realizing I'd been running from myself. "I don't either," I admitted, my throat tight. I wanted to say something that would make it easier, make it less complicated, but no words existed. The electricity between us was too heavy to be explained, too fragile to be touched. She exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that carries years of restraint, exhaustion, and longing all at once. "I shouldn't feel this way," she said. The words were faint, almost swallowed by the sound of the rain against the windows. Her fingers twitched nervously, brushing against the edge of the counter like it anchored her to reality. I wanted to tell her it was okay, that she could feel whatever she needed to feel, that I wasn't going anywhere, but I stayed still. There was nothing to do except witness her, and maybe that was the cruelest part. "I can't keep pretending," she said finally, voice breaking slightly. The weight of it pressed into my chest. Her eyes glistened with something unshed, and I realized that the air between us had shifted irreversibly. We couldn't go back to casual glances or stolen touches. I nodded slowly, unsure of what else to do. My hands hung at my sides, useless. The silence had spoken louder than anything I could have said, and for the first time, I understood the depth of it. Then she looked away, back toward the window, voice almost lost in the rhythm of the storm. "I'm tired of holding this in," she whispered. Her words weren't a question, weren't even a plea. They were a confession to herself, and in the tremor of her voice, I felt every unsaid thing between us. And in that moment, I realized nothing would ever be the same again. The shop was quiet that morning, sunlight filtering through dusty windows and catching the faint sheen of oil on the floor. Margot was at her desk, flipping through an old notebook, the leather worn and soft. I lingered near the workbench, pretending to organize tools, but my eyes kept drifting to her. You ever regret things? She asked suddenly, not looking at me. Her voice was low, almost hesitant. I froze, unsure if she meant the work, the shop, or something else entirely. Sometimes, I said cautiously. Why? She shrugged, tapping a finger against the notebook. I found a letter from him. Her voice cracked just enough to make me notice. I was so young. Thought I could handle everything, but I just messed up. She paused, inhaling slowly. He left, and I never really recovered. I didn't know what to say. Words felt inadequate, clumsy in the face of her vulnerability. I wanted to reach out, but I stayed where I was, letting her speak. There was something sacred in this, something fragile I wasn't supposed to touch. He wasn't a good man, she said finally, eyes on the page. But I loved him more than I should have, and I hate that I still remember. Her hands trembled slightly as she closed the notebook, clutching it to her chest like it could hold her steady. I moved closer, careful, deliberately slow. You don't have to hate it, I said. The words sounded foolish, but they slipped out before I could stop them. Some things, they just make us who we are. She looked up at me then, really looked, and the usual wall of composure had crumbled. Her eyes glistened with something that wasn't just regret. It was the ache of memory, the weight of a past she hadn't shared with anyone. And in that moment, I realized how small, how human, how achingly fragile she could be. I'm not sure I've ever told anyone that, she whispered, almost to herself. Then she laughed, soft and almost bitter, shaking her head. God, I sound pathetic. You're not, I said quickly. Not even a little. My throat tightened. You're incredible. And I didn't even mean the professional, untouchable part. I meant her, entirely, complicated and honest, all of it. She stared at me, and for a heartbeat, the world fell away. The tools, the papers, the hum of the shop. Just us, in that fragile bubble, suspended over years of mistakes, absences, and lost chances. Then, from somewhere in her pocket, a phone buzzed. She glanced at it, and I caught the faintest flicker of a smile. It's nothing, she said quickly, sliding it back into her pocket. But I saw it. The momentary light, the small human reaction that made her real to me in a way nothing else had. I wanted to ask her about it, about him, about the letter, about everything, but I didn't. Some things couldn't be named yet. Some things had to be held in silence. She stood, smoothing the notebook against her side, and for a split second, our hands brushed as she passed me. Not enough to break anything, but enough to send a current through my chest I couldn't ignore. And just like that, something shifted. Something subtle, almost invisible, yet seismic in the way it made my stomach twist and my chest ache. I stayed frozen, watching her retreat to the other side of the shop, feeling the world rearrange itself around that single, quiet moment. The shop was quiet again, late afternoon sunlight spilling through the dusty windows, painting everything gold. Margot was at the counter, counting parts, her movements slow, deliberate. I leaned against the workbench, pretending to tighten a bolt, but my eyes never left her. There was a weight in the air, soft, inevitable. I don't want to pretend anymore, she said, almost to herself. I froze mid-motion, letting the wrench fall to the rag on the bench. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a confession meant to change the world. It was just truth. Quiet, unyielding, impossible to ignore. I swallowed, trying to keep my chest from tightening. Neither do I admitted softly. The words weren't a promise, weren't a declaration. Just acknowledgement. We both knew this was dangerous, complicated, and somehow entirely inevitable. She didn't look at me, just adjusted a stack of invoices, fingers lingering on the edges like she needed grounding. I took a careful step closer, feeling the space between us shrink without saying anything. Our proximity was enough to communicate what words never could. I noticed how tired she looked, how the faintest crease between her brows softened when she concentrated, the small tremor in her hands when she picked up a wrench. And yet, there was grace in it. Power, even. She was layered, and I saw it now fully. Not just the confident boss, not just the woman who made my heart race, but her. Every careful motion, every hesitation, every small vulnerability. I moved closer still, careful, slow, as if the world might shatter if I went too fast. Our shoulders brushed lightly. She didn't flinch. I let my hand hover near hers, unsure if she would pull back or let the touch happen. And then she reached out, fingers brushing mine, not intentionally, perhaps, or perhaps deliberately. I didn't question it. I just held the contact, letting the warmth linger. No words were necessary. None could capture what had built between us over weeks of stolen glances, shared silences, and the gentle gravity of mutual understanding. We didn't need to label it. We didn't need to announce it. We just were. She exhaled slowly, eyes closing for a moment, leaning her forehead briefly against the counter. I stayed near, silent, breathing the same air, feeling the quiet weight of all that had passed, and all that was possible now. Minutes passed in stillness, unremarkable yet monumental. Our hands remained lightly touching, the connection intimate without requiring explanation. I could feel her heartbeat, steady but slow, matching the rhythm of my own. When she finally opened her eyes, she didn't speak. She didn't need to. The acknowledgement hung between us, soft but resolute. The truth, recognized. A mutual decision had already been made, quietly and irrevocably, in the space we shared. I leaned slightly closer, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. She let me. No sparks, no grand gestures, just a small, human affirmation of what was already true. And there, in the quiet glow of the afternoon, with the tools and the dust and the light and our hands brushing together, I realized this was how it would always be. Not dramatic, not loud, not perfect, but ours. Earned. Real. The shop hummed around us, ordinary and eternal, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at peace. Looking back, it feels like a different life, like the shop, the storm, the long evenings, were all part of someone else's story. Yet it's still mine, still hers, stitched into the quiet corners of memory I revisit too often. I remember the way she moved through that space, confident, layered, untouchable, until the rare moments when she wasn't. The moments when her vulnerability peeked through, when her laughter slipped out unguarded, when a hand trembled just slightly as she clutched a wrench or a notebook. I remember holding that space with her, silent, watching, breathing together, knowing something irreversible had begun. I've learned more about patience and restraint than I thought possible. I've learned how small gestures, a brush of a hand, a shared glance, a hesitant smile, can carry more weight than any confession. And I've learned that love doesn't always need fireworks. Sometimes it lives in the quiet spaces between two people who see each other fully, flaws and all, and choose to stay. Margot, she changed, too. Maybe not outwardly, not in ways anyone else could notice. But I saw her shoulders relax, her eyes soften, the tension she carried dissolve in moments I'll never forget. She let someone in, not just anyone, but someone who waited, who watched, who cared enough to notice the small fractures beneath her armor. And in doing so, she taught me what it means to be seen, really seen, without pretense or expectation. Our connection never exploded into grand declarations. It didn't need to. It grew slowly, deliberately, in a way that made it feel earned. And in that slow burn, in that patient, almost invisible evolution, I found something I didn't even know I was looking for. The quiet certainty that some things, some people, change your life simply by existing alongside you. I often wonder if she remembers the little things as vividly as I do. The brush of our hands over a clipboard, the hesitant pause before a glance, the silent acknowledgement of shared mistakes. Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. It doesn't matter. What matters is that those moments shaped everything that came after. Now, when I walk past the shop or hear a distant rumble of rain, I feel a flicker of that old tension, the gentle pull that started it all. I smile quietly, remembering that love doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it whispers, lingers, and waits for us to notice. And I do. I always notice. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?